Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking, and I'd like to welcome you aboard this night flight. Please prepare for takeoff. All right, what's up, people? Let's see who we got in the live chat. We got Team Batman Boxing. We got Anthony YouTube. We got Mac. We got High Noon. We got Pacer. We got T-Todd. I'm going to call you that. We got EJ. KS. Martin Wood Wilkinson. Quadruple A. Mr. Williams. Nathan Sterling, big up. We got Ben. We got Tony. We got Alexander. We are on the night flight. So, one thing which we didn't really get round to talking about much in previous streams and previous night flights specifically is dating. The dating scene. Obviously, I talk about the dating scene in Western countries so much because it's changed to the point where it's unrecognizable to the dating scene that I grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s. But we can talk about the dating scene in whatever country around the world because it's very, very different depending on the country. Shout out to Ben for the super chat early. And I'd like to ask you guys what your experience is in the dating scene. Obviously, most of my audience are men. But if there are any females in the chat, I'd like to hear it, hear about your experiences as well with regards to the dating scene. Yes, we can talk about boxing. We can talk about any topics you guys like within reason, obviously, because this platform is pretty censorship heavy. So you've got to be careful by way of the algorithms and the community guidelines and whatnot. So, yeah, I'd like to throw it over to the chat early and allow you guys to tell me your views on modern dating. And when you give me your views in your comments, tell me your age as well and what region of, what country you live in and what region of that country, particularly if it's like the UK. Now, just to lead off here, so I grew up as a teenager and a young man in the 1990s. Now, obviously, this was the pre-internet, pre-social media age. There were no dating apps. There was nothing like that. And in fact, before I proceed, can I be heard? Can you guys actually hear me in the chat? I want to make sure you guys can hear me. I think I can be heard because JR just said there's so much truth in the saying, treat them mean, keep them keen, within reason, of course. Okay, I can be heard. All right. So shout out to Alex S. So I grew up as a teenager and a young man in the 1990s in the pre-internet, pre-social media, pre-dating apps age. And there's always been challenges as a man with regards to dating. But obviously when you're a teenager, and certainly back in the days, the girls who you were dating or attempting to date wouldn't have so many expectations of you because you're just a teenager, right? They're not expecting you to have everything in the world. As a teenage young man, your looks and your physique and your confidence counts for a lot more than when you move on into adulthood. That's when women expect you to have this amount of money and be, have this particular social status, etc., etc. But the dynamics of dating was so much different back then because they didn't have access to the amount of men that they have today. So, for example, shout out to Ben for another super chat. Just want to read this quickly. He says, married, never had issues with tricks. Philadelphia, PA. Being tall helps with the ladies. Anyway, Holmes versus Foreman, who you got, Hatman? I'll come on to that. Shout out to Lawrence King as well for the super chat. So back in the days, because women didn't have access to, there was no social media back then, there was no dating apps, they didn't have access to as many men as they do today. Therefore, the only place that they got to talk to men, generally, right, with regards to dating, was in person when a man would approach them. And for that reason, the majority of women, not all women, because some women have always been stuck up even back then, but the majority of women were more receptive to being approached back in the days. And so that made it easier for men. They were more receptive to being approached. They didn't get to see good-looking men or interact with good-looking men as often as they do today because of the online dynamic. And so you tended to have a much higher success rate back in those days. Now, I'm in a position, people of my generation are in a unique position. I'm talking about, let's say, late Gen X, maybe early millennials. So from the late 1970s, if you're born from the late 70s through to about 81, or let's say the early 80s, if you were born in that time frame, then you are in a unique position to have experienced dating in both worlds, in the pre-internet, pre-social media, pre-dating app age, and also in the, not post, but, in the dating app age. And so you will have seen the changes in attitudes. You will have experienced it firsthand. You see, older people who are maybe married and whatnot, people older than me in their 50s or 60s, most of them won't have experienced the change because they might be married to whoever, right? They've never actually dealt with these younger women who have a very different mindset and a different attitude and a different approach to dating, who have so many more options and whatnot. And so they often cannot relate to the struggles of younger men. Let's say men under the age of 30. They can't relate to the struggles. They just tell them, well, you need to do this, this, and this. But they've never experienced the difficulties that young men today go through with regards to dealing with women. But as I say, people of my generation, within, let's say, a 5 or 6 year difference either side of my age, they've experienced and seen both worlds, And that's why I feel like I'm in a good position to speak on these topics. People older than me, maybe are not in such a good position. And people younger, well, they don't know any different. They don't know what dating was like in the pre-social media, pre-dating app age. But with regards to Ben's super chat, shout out to him again. He says, Holmes versus Foreman, who you got, Hatman? I got Holmes. Larry Holmes on points over George Foreman all day. Any version of Foreman. Old or young. Lawrence King says, one thing that shocked me about getting older is women find you more attractive as you get older, not less. Well, that depends. It depends on how you look, and it depends on what your financial status is. Obviously, women are hypergamous. Most women. And that means that they are attracted to men who have a higher socio-economic status than they do. So, to put it simply, women tend to date up, right? Now, most men don't hit their financial stride until their mid-40s. And so for that reason, women are going to find certain older men more attractive than when those men were younger, because the men have got the experience, maybe they've got confidence, and they've got their ish together, as people like to say. They've hit their financial stride. And if they've got a network of guys around them and they've got a good life, then of course you're going to attract women. But there are a lot of middle-aged men who for whatever reason, circumstance, personality, bad decisions, etc., are not doing well in their mid-40s, financially, physically, socially. And those men are not going to find it easier to attract women at that age than they did when they were young. They're going to find it even more difficult. EJ says, I think it works both ways. Women and men both have more options with online dating, and that causes negative behavior on both sides. I disagree, and I'll tell you for why. Shout out to Matt in the super chat. I disagree, because men are the ones who initiate conversation, who initiate contact, who initiate conversations with women, either in person or online, 95% of the time, right? So men are still basically having to try and impress women. And because women get so many messages in their inbox and whatnot from men, they basically go into this mind state where unless you are an incredible standout, you know, of all these guys that are messaging them, unless you have something absolutely spectacular about you that just jumps out of the screen, then they're not even going to reply to you. Do you know what I mean? This is the dynamic. So the social media era, and again, I've lived obviously after or during the social media era and before, so I've seen the change. In the social media era, women are far more flaky. They have far higher standards. They're far more difficult to engage with, etc., etc. They're actually more narcissistic, more self-centered, and self-interested than women of previous generations. As I say, when I was a young man, a teenager and a young man in the 90s, so often when you would approach even a good-looking girl, they would feel, and you could see it in their body language and their response, they would feel lucky that you're talking to them. Do you know what I mean? Especially if it was a good-looking girl back then, because guys would sometimes be intimidated. Like the regular guy might be intimidated by approaching a girl who's really, really good-looking. So when you approach her and, you know, you're a good-looking guy, she's like, oh my gosh, my dreams have come true. The guy who looks like this is willing to approach me. You see, that's why the social media age massively favors women with regards to their options. I mean, there's been studies done, for example, and I'll get to the super chats in a second. There's been studies done on dating apps like Tinder, for example, which show that women tend to swipe, is it right or left? Which one is the no? I can't remember. I think is the right no or the left no? I think the left is no, right? Anyway, whichever direction no is, women tend to swipe left or no at a much higher rate than men do. Women tend to get a far higher number of matches than men do on these dating apps. These dating apps are really designed to fleece men out of money. That's really what they're designed for. And the same goes for inboxes. Women get an inordinate number of messages in their inbox on dating apps, on social media even. The average man, he's not getting anybody messaging him. He's getting very few swipes and so on. So it massively favors women in terms of the modern dynamics of dating with the influence of social media, dating apps, and what have you. Shout out to High Noon for the super chat. He says, dated during lockdown, the women were mentally different during that time, had the longest roster ever, all ages, all cultures. That's very true. And many people remarked on that, is during lockdown, because the nightclubs were closed and the bars were closed and all these different things were closed, women were deprived of the normal social activities that they like to engage in on a regular basis. Yeah, it's very easy, extremely, it's never been easier for even the average woman, an ugly woman, to go out there and get laid. Let's just say laid, right? It's never been easier for them. But of course, during that L-down, the shutdown, all of a sudden, it became difficult, right? Because they were not having the normal interactions. So many of them took to the dating apps and they were basically desperate for a man to come and deal with them. Yeah, so what High said there, many people made the same observation and, yeah, would concur with you 100%. Tony says, I don't even go clubbing anymore. For what? To get rejected by fours and single mothers? No thanks. And this is the experience of so many men in the dating world today. They tell you the same, at least in the Western world. And I do want to talk, if anybody lives in a different country, in fact, I'm going to get to Martin Wood Wilkinson here. Anyone who lives in a country outside of the West, please tell me about your dating experiences, because I'm sure it will be very different. Martin says, I'm in my mid-40s. I've been married for 14 years. Live in Hong Kong now. There are dating sites galore here which are shamelessly materialistic. For example, people are picked on their income. Okay, that's the dating scene in Hong Kong, according to Martin Wood Wilkinson. Shout out to him. Louis Mensa says, I'd say top 10% of men are getting top 40% of women. I would agree with that. And again, this comes down to the hypergamous nature of women. You see, back in the days, I keep talking about the 90s, right? In my prime, the 90s, early 2000s. Back in the days, women didn't have access to the type of men they have access to today. So since they're hypergamous and they're looking for guys with the highest socioeconomic status that they can get hold of, as well as the looks and everything else. Back in the days, they can access those kind of guys far more easily now with social media and dating apps and whatnot. Whereas back in the days, most women, even good-looking women, were confined to the pool of men in their local area, the pool of men who they grew up around, or even the pool of men who they saw at nightclubs or walking the street, which was a much smaller pool of men. The chances of them finding whatever a high-value man or, the ultimate man was far lower back then. Therefore, they had not so high expectations, and they would be more receptive to just a local guy approaching them and so on and so forth. Nowadays, they want to live some luxury lifestyle like the Kardashians or something. And they do have access to those kind of guys. If you're good, there's probably never been a time in human history, a better time in human history, to be a good-looking female than there is today. I mean, they don't even need to really have any qualifications or work or anything. They can just use social media to get a guy to pay for everything, or multiple guys to pay for everything. And if they're that way inclined, they can make an incredible amount of money on OF. I mean, the amount of good-looking girls in the Western world today who are making enormous amounts of money, and I'm talking crazy money, high six figures on OF, is a madness. It's changed the game. Totally changed the game. And, when I first started doing Patreon, I've been talking about these topics on Patreon since at least 2017. I think that's when I started Patreon, 2017. One of the earliest Patreon episodes I did, I'll come on to Manu Minute in a second. Thank you for your super chat. Again, shout out to High Noon. One of the earliest Patreon episodes I did was talking about the secret to successful relationships or marriages. The secret. And the secret is actually very simple. All you have to do is look at the countries that have the highest success rate with regards to marriages, relationships, and so on, and see what goes on in those countries, see what the dynamic is, socioeconomically, and therefore between male and female. And it's quite simple. The secret to long-lasting marriages, low divorce rates, etc., is mutual dependency. It's not love. Anyone who tells you it's love is either a very lucky person, right? Or somebody who is misinformed and misguided. The secret to the vast majority of successful marriages on this earth is mutual dependency. When the two people depend on each other, let's say the man depends on the woman to make his house a home, domestic duties, raising the kids, sorting the food, etc., etc. You know, the traditional gender roles. When the man relies on the woman for those things, then he's going to stick with her if she's doing that job well. He becomes dependent on her for that aspect of his life. And if the woman, let's say in these developing nations, it's the norm, right, doesn't have the ability to earn as much as a man and doesn't have the ability to have the lifestyle that the man is able to give her, then she is going to depend on that man. And this is what keeps people together. Now, some people say, well, that's sad. If that's all that's keeping you together, you might as well not be together. Well, once people reach old age and they're alone, in their 60s and 70s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and they're alone, many of them are going to regret being so diehard about finding the love of their life. Somebody who they just fall head over heels with and they have this, romantic infatuation with and this so-called love. They're going to finally realize in old age when they're alone that actually having someone that you're mutually dependent on isn't actually such a bad thing after all. Having that company. Yeah? Because when you reach a certain age, and it's different for different people, bedroom stuff isn't as important. It's more the companionship that you value. You see? And so when it comes to the whole love thing, love is something that can grow. I don't think there are different types of love. I think that in my view, in my definition of love, there's only one kind of love. And that is the love that you would have for your close family. That's love, okay? What you would have in a relationship would often not be what I class as love. It's some type of it's some type of infatuation maybe, it's some type of physical attraction, but it's not really love, yeah? I think we need to come up with a different word for it. But when two people have, let's say in a traditional society, mutual dependency, they're mutually dependent on each other, and they come from a culture where they teach you. I mean, you speak to people from India, for example, which has an extremely low divorce rate and a very high marriage rate. You speak to people from India and they will tell you that romantic love is never the priority, or very rarely the priority when people get married in that country. It's more so about cultural compatibility, socioeconomic compatibility, so on and so forth. And obviously they have a certain ideology, and the wider society puts expectations on people. These are the things that actually glue marriages together, and people learn to enjoy and appreciate the mutual dependency and love a deeper type of love, not the love that is based upon what's in the bedroom or fluttery feelings in the heart or anything like that, but love that comes from the day-to-day grind that a mutually dependent couple will go through, building a life together. Like the people who, let's say you go through tough experiences with, or even good experiences with in school, sometimes in the workplace, so on and so forth, you can end up with friends for life because of those shared experiences. And that is how lasting, real love is built in marriages. It's built like that. Two people who have the same goal, the same ideology, the same vision, that have a sense of duty, a sense of responsibility to whoever, their community, their parents, their ancestors, and they learn to enjoy that role, many of them. Not saying all of them. Some of them don't like it, but a lot of them do enjoy it. And that is the key to successful marriages. It's not all this stuff that they tell you in the media in the West, where they, particularly towards women, obsess about the woman, must feel fluttery feelings in the heart, and, the stuff in the bedroom needs to be incredible all the time. And they basically encourage women to leave relationships for the most minor of reasons. That's what they do in the West through the movies and all this type of stuff, even the agony aunts and what have you. So yeah, it's really not a mystery as far as why in Western society and other countries around the world, but it's mainly Western society that's the epicenter of it. It's really no mystery as to why relationships are failing, marriages are failing at such a high rate, particularly with the younger generations, because of course the older generations in the West are still married at a pretty high percentage. But the younger generations, it is apocalyptically bad. It is. It's apocalyptically bad because there isn't the mutual dependency anymore that there was in previous generations. See, always, as a man, you always need to factor in hypergamy, the fact that women are hypergamous. So you should be looking to, again, it's incredible that we've got this situation where when women are seeking to date up, they're encouraged to do that and they're told there's nothing wrong with that. But when men will turn around and say, okay, as a man, you need to date down. You need to date a woman who's less educated than you, got less money than you, a lower socioeconomic position. They'll say, oh, that's predatory. Oh, you're trying to exploit the woman. It's like, hang on, well, isn't the woman who's looking to date up trying to exploit the man for his resources? So, you always have to factor in hypergamy. Yeah? And I've been saying for years, as a man, you should be looking to date down, not in terms of looks, socioeconomically. You need to be dating women who earn less money than you, preferably significantly less. Now, if you don't make much money and you live in a Western country, well, you might want to look to move somewhere that isn't so affluent, that isn't so prosperous economically. If you have maybe an online business, or you've got savings or transferable skills that could allow you to earn more money in a different country, then I would advise you do that if you're having issues in the West dating. So anyway, that's my little monologue there. Shout out to Manu Minute for the super chat. He says, thoughts on Drake versus Kendrick beef and the general state of USA rap. So I did actually get asked this question a few live streams back, and so I'll give a similar answer now. I'm somebody that grew up in the so-called golden age, the golden era of hip-hop, rap in America, the 90s, very early 2000s. And for somebody of my generation that grew up on all that, the Kendrick-Drake beef, from my perspective, to me, was the corniest rap beef and rap battle that I can ever remember. Basically, I thought it was corny as hell. You got Kendrick Lamar with a little Kermit the Frog, his little voice that he comes on with. He comes on talking about all that. I didn't like any of the beats. Well, some of Drake's beats in the tracks I heard were decent, but I didn't like Kendrick's beats at all. And Kendrick's annoying little voice. And Drake was using AI for some of his tracks to sound like Tupac and Snoop, and it's just weird. See, the battles I liked, and one of my favorite diss tracks of all time, was Beanie Siegel going at Jadakiss. That's the type of battle, that's the type of diss track I'm talking about. Whereas Kendrick and Drake, it was basically a nerd in Kendrick battling a sweet boy. And I've been over this term, sweet boy. It's an old school term that we used to use in London back in the days. I don't know if they still use it. But a sweet boy is like, you know, an R&B guy. A guy who's very manicured and he has that soft look about him. Sings love songs and what have you. Yeah? So that's what you had. Kendrick, a nerd versus a sweet boy. And that's just not what I look for in my rap battles. I found it corny. But hey, it's a new day and time. The genre of hip-hop is much wider now, and there are so many subgenres within it. It attracts a much broader audience now, different types of people. So maybe I sound like some old man that's stuck in the past when I say that to me it was a corny battle. But there you go. That's me. That's my take on it. Shout out to Goozy in the live chat. Chainsaw says, air conditioner 1, Dubois nil. Tony says, if you treat them like a celebrity, they will treat you like a fan. I guess he's talking about dating in the modern age. Yeah, that is true in terms of how the attitude of modern women is different to women in, let's say, the 90s, early 2000s, you know, the pre-social media age. But a lot of women have got this thing now where if a guy stands his ground and is not willing to simp and all that type of stuff, these women will then call the guy sassy. Say, oh, he's a sassy guy just because he's actually got some self-respect, you know? And because women have all these simps up in their inbox who are willing to jump through hoops of fire, swim through swimming pools full of razor blades and stuff like that, just in order to get their number, get an opportunity for a date. Because women have got simps like that in their inbox 24/7, even a guy who stands his ground and doesn't bow to silly demands and doesn't simp himself out. There's a term for you. People talk about pimping themselves out. How about simping themselves out? Because a guy doesn't simp himself out, these women will still brush him off. So they'll still treat guys like that like a fan, at least a lot of women to a large extent, because they've got access to so many simps. So this is why I've been telling guys since 2017 before. I'm not trying to take any credit here because I was saying this on Patreon and all of those early posts are still up. In 2017, I was telling guys, get your passports and get out of the West if you want to have a better dating experience. So for those of you who doubt what I'm saying, some of these dating apps have got the ability or the capacity to set your location in a foreign country, right? And so if you doubt what I'm saying, I would challenge you to set your location to somewhere, let's say in the Far East, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, or set your location to somewhere in Africa, or set your location to most places in Latin America. And you are going to find that you get way more matches, for one, way more likes. And when you start talking to these women on these dating apps, they're going to be far more agreeable. They're going to make far more, not all of them, but in most cases, they're going to make far more of an effort to actually engage with you. And that is what women were like, for the most part, in the pre-social media age, even in the early days of websites like MySpace. The amount of girls I got off MySpace those times, it was easy peasy. You know, there was no weird behavior. You know, like some girls these days apparently don't even want to give guys their number on dating apps and don't want to. I mean, how bizarre is that? Like, you've matched with a guy and then he asks for your number and you're like, no, let's just talk on the app. It's perverse. right? When you talk to girls in other parts of the world in real life or on social media or on dating apps, you'll find that the experience is vastly different. This is why I've been telling guys since 2017, get your passports and get out. If you're having issues. If you're not having any problems, if you're one of the top 10%, 15, 20% of men in the West, then I guess there's no reason to go anywhere. If it's easy peasy for you, you know, I like the old saying, take it easy. And if you get it easy the first time, get it again. If that's you, as a man in the West, you're finding it easy peasy, then obviously you can disregard all of this advice. But if that's not you, and I have to imagine that if you're under the age of 30 or 35, for the majority of men, that's definitely not you. You're finding it difficult. And that's all the feedback I've got from particularly young men over the past few years, that they're finding it difficult. Then, yeah, get that passport. Shout out to Tony T. Shout out to Goozy. Shout out to Raz. He says, especially if they know your wife is decent, you always get more attention from good-looking women if you're not with a good-looking, decent woman. Yeah. That's another thing I spoke about in the previous live stream, is that women are, or it's not all women, but most women need to have their man validated by other women. Yeah. If other women are validating you with their attention, then the woman you're with is going to like you more, and vice versa, right? If you're married, many men report this. I was just talking to a friend of mine recently about a friend of his. He's not really a friend of mine. I've met the guy a few times. He's not really a friend of mine, but a person that we both know. And this individual is married. And he was telling my friend recently that ever since he got married, ever since he's got that wedding ring on, the attention he gets from women has just gone through the roof. Yeah. And this is why I remember Chris Rock actually in one of his stand-ups saying that this is why men cheat. This is why a lot of men cheat. Because women find you more attractive when you're taken. So it's like women are actually part of the problem. If women found you less attractive when you're taken, then there'd be less cheating going on from men. But no, women actually find you more attractive when you're taken. Yeah, that's how it tends to be. Because you've been validated by a woman who's obviously been willing to marry you. I'm going to get onto these other super chats. Shout out to everybody. Hold tight. T. Todd says, I'm a 19-year-old Italian. My perception is that at my age, everybody has the canon of beauty in their eyes, making everyone thirsty for the best, not able to expect any less than the best. And do you live in Italy? Because my perception, maybe it's totally wrong, but my perception is that Italy is still a lot more traditional than, let's say, somewhere like Britain. I mean, I remember when I worked in security in luxury retail, and there was an Italian guy, very well-built Italian guy, who was one of the members of staff there, one of the few straight members of staff other than the security, right, in luxury retail. And I was talking to this guy about why he moved to the UK, the Italian guy, one time. And he, don't take offense here if you're British. I'm just relaying what the Italian guy said. He said that he likes it in the UK because the women are easier than they are in Italy. He said in Italy, you got to date a woman for like 6 months and meet her mother and all this type of stuff before she's willing to sleep with you. Whereas, according to him, the British girls, they'll sleep with you immediately. Now, this was in the early 2000s, so things have changed a lot since, right? In the ways I've previously described with the dating apps and the dating scene and what have you. But, yeah, certainly from what he told me back then, and my perception is that Italy is still, it's not a completely traditional society, but it's more traditional than, let's say, the UK is socially. It's a bit more socially conservative. But maybe it's dramatically changed over the past few years. You tell me what the case is. Striker says, when I was young, you'd meet a girl, give her your number, and wait to see if your landline rang one day. It was that simple. Indeed, that's what it was like. Now, let me get onto these super chats before I read other chats here. It was much more simple. And I do feel sorry for the younger guys who never got to experience how simple life was and how simple dating was in the pre-internet age. It was way better. Shout out to High Noon. He says, just a note to everyone, never date anyone who has been, okay, VX. You can now test to see if someone has been VX if it's that serious. I will never. All right. Big up High Noon. George, the Last Patriot, shout out to you for the super chat. He says, Parker came in at his heaviest, 269 pounds, all muscle. He finally looks like a stereotypical Polynesian Samoan rather than a male model. I wouldn't say it was all muscle. I don't think he was 269, was he? Was he like 265? He was close to that. Let me have a look exactly what the weight was. Let me have a look exactly what the weight was for Joseph Parker. He was, okay, 267. So yeah, there or thereabouts. You're only 2 pounds off. So yeah, it's about that weight. Very heavy. And indeed, a lot of those Polynesians are thick set. So many of them were in the rugby teams, obviously. In that part of the world, it's full of Polynesian people because they are so big and strong and whatnot. And yeah, Parker with the extra weight looks more like a stereotypical Polynesian, for sure. But it remains to be seen whether that weight is going to suit him, because he was up against the guy who just rolled off the couch, flew halfway across the world, hadn't trained for 6 months, barely had any sleep. And he, got the knockout in 2 rounds. But let's see him against somebody that's had proper prep at that weight, and then we'll see what it is. A shout out to Adam for the super chat. He says, Full Metal Jacket or Apocalypse Now? Now we got a question. That's a real question. I'm going to go with... That's such a tough damn question, bro. You guys love hitting me with the most difficult questions on planet Earth. That's a great one. I love both movies. I'm going to go with Apocalypse Now. For the reason that, for me personally, the best part of Full Metal Jacket is when they're in boot camp. And that's like the first, whatever it is, half or third of the film. Once they get to Vietnam, it's not as interesting. It's still good, but it's not as compelling as the first section of the film where they were in boot camp. Whereas Apocalypse Now is interesting throughout. And I like the music in Apocalypse Now better. And also, one of the reasons that Full Metal Jacket wasn't quite as spectacular, or anywhere near as spectacular really as Apocalypse Now, is because Full Metal Jacket, like the Vietnam scenes, were actually filmed in London, believe it or not. In Docklands, before they built all the skyscrapers there. That's where they filmed Full Metal Jacket, yeah. And if you notice in the scenes that they're supposed to be in Vietnam, in Full Metal Jacket, the camera is often shooting from a very low angle. And that's so that they don't catch, the buildings in the background and the stuff that was there that makes it obvious that they're not in Vietnam. Yeah, but back then, Docklands had a lot of wasteland, and that's what they used to film Full Metal Jacket, all the wasteland in the Docklands area. They managed to dress it up with a few palm trees and broken buildings to look like it was Vietnam and whatnot during that conflict. But yeah, shout out to Adam Fawkes. That's a great question. I go with Apocalypse Now. What about you? Mark Hatch says, I like Apocalypse Now more too. Great movie. I love how the story progressed and gets more interesting and crazy as they go deeper into the jungle. Yeah, that's one of the films that I never really get tired of watching, Apocalypse Now. There's something hypnotic about the music. The soundtrack, that like 80s synth soundtrack. It's kind of like a similar vibe to Scarface. In fact, it might have been the same composer. What's the guy called now? Is it Giorgio Moroder? Is that his name? Yeah, similar to synthwave. Obviously, synthwave has got like a beat behind it and whatnot, but this was more like just synths without a beat in Apocalypse Now, if you've ever watched the film. And yeah, Apocalypse Now is like a hypnotic movie. It draws you into this like hypnotic state. I like that vibe that the film has got, you know. Great performance, obviously, by Martin Sheen. You got, who else is in there now? Harrison Ford has a little cameo near the start of the film. And obviously Marlon Brando as the main villain. Some memorable lines in the film. And yeah, I just love the atmosphere of it. In fact, I like the film so much that I got the Redux version of Apocalypse Now, which is like half an hour longer or something like that. What you know, they often call a director's cut. Yeah. Ayed says his Full Metal Jacket, the one with Charlie Sheen. No. Full Metal Jacket's got Martin Sheen, his brother. Martin Sheen, Marlon Brando, Harrison Ford. It's also got a very young Lawrence Fishburne in Apocalypse Now. He plays one of the main characters. Chris Jackson says, if you go to another country to get women, you're a simp. All you're going to get are women who are on the game. As somebody who's traveled around, I can tell you that that is completely untrue. Yes, you will, on the dating apps, encounter a much larger number of hookers than you would in the UK. But what you're saying there is completely untrue. You can far more easily get decent women in many other countries. And as far as, you know, being a simp, if you go to another country, that's like a complete contradiction of the reality. If you stay in a country where you're having no success with women, what tends to happen to most men is they become simps. They get so desperate that they start simping. So it's actually a way to avoid becoming a simp. Leave the country and go date somewhere where women are more agreeable. Because again, I've lived through the pre-internet, pre-dating app era, and within the dating app, social media era. And I can tell you how massively different the behavior of women was when I was a young man compared to their behavior today. And I've traveled many countries in the world, and I can tell you that there are plenty of countries where you can go where the women behave like they did back in the 90s. Yeah. They're more agreeable, they're easier to approach, etc., etc. But the only part of your comment there that's somewhat relevant is to say that, yes, when you are on dating apps in some of these countries, there will be an awful lot of women on there that are on the game that are hookers. Maybe you're looking for hookers, I don't know. But if you're not, you need to use your discernment. It should be obvious, right? When a woman's on the game, she's going to dress a certain way, going to carry herself a certain way. Her pictures are going to look a certain way. Although some of them might even look humble and they're on the game. That can happen too. But then you need to ask the relevant questions and just watch out for the way that she interacts with you and the things that she says. Ask questions and learn something about her life and so on. Snooker Fan TV says the Alabama Slammer is back. And speaking of synthwave, I always liked synthwave. I grew up in the 1980s, and I grew up in the 1980s and 1990s, right? I'm a late Gen Xer. So synthwave was obviously very big in the 80s. It's what characterized the 80s musically, or one of the things that characterized the 80s musically was synthwave. And so it's always got a place in my heart. Striker says Apocalypse Now holds it together for the duration and the payoff is amazing. I completely agree. Hyro, shout out to Hyro. He says, have you ever read Heart of Darkness, the book Apocalypse Now is based on? No, I haven't read it, but I was aware that it's based on that book. Strangingness says Independence Day was kind of trippy. I was never a fan of that film. Snooker Fan TV saying Wilder going to get his belts back. All right. JR says, excluding the Batmans, what are your top 3 Nolan films? Inception is my number 1. Top 3 Nolan films, excluding the Batmans. I would say Memento, Interstellar, and I'll go with Tenet. I know it's not one of his more popular films with most people, but I like the film. So I'll go Interstellar, Memento, and Tenet. If you're excluding the Batman films. If you're including them, then obviously Dark Knight goes in there. Now Kylie says, the scene where Willard floats into Colonel Kurtz's camp with all those Vietnamese staring on is intensely brilliant. Yeah. The cinematography is fantastic. For me, that's Francis Ford Coppola's best movie. Snooker Fan TV says, what about the Wilder comeback? I did a live stream on that yesterday. So if you want to hear me talk about that, I can talk about it a little bit here, but I want to prioritize other topics. Strangingness says, yeah, I get what you mean. It feels like Apocalypse Now. You're on LSD while watching it. Exactly that. It feels like you're somehow high without actually being high. It takes you into another world. It's a very absorbing film, at least for me. Irons Analysis says, Hatman, how much does a guy's value go up in the eyes of women if they lift weights a few times a week? It depends on what your starting point was. If you were already in decent shape, but you're just lifting weights a few times a week to gain some muscle, your value is not going to go up much. Making a lot more money makes your value in the eyes of women go up a lot more than lifting any weights. And it's not enough to just have money. You have to actually flaunt money to some extent. And you also have to have a network of friends, and you have to have a life that she wants to be part of. You have to have a happening life in order for your value to go up in the eyes of women. Because if a woman looks at your life and she's like, there's nothing going on in there, she's not going to want to be a part of it for the most part. And this is why I say, you got guys like Fresh and Fit. One of the things that Myron says that I agree with is that men, when they actually love a woman, because there are plenty of men in relationships with women who they don't really love, but when men love women, they tend to love idealistically. And what that means is the man will love the woman completely. He'll be ride or die with that woman till the ends of the earth, till the bitter end. No matter what happens, he's going to stick with that woman, right? So men tend to love like that when they actually love. They love idealistically, whereas women more often will love opportunistically. And in my opinion, that is not really love. And we're talking in the Western world now, not in traditional societies so much. But in the Western world, women tend to love opportunistically. They look at a guy's life, they see what he's got going for him, and okay, I'll love this guy, if you can even call that love. while he's doing well and while his life looks good and so on and so forth. But the minute the guy falls on hard times, the minute the guy shows vulnerability and weakness, the woman's like, ugh, and she's out of there. That is very common. Okay, so again, that's an example of how men love idealistically, women tend to love opportunistically. Pacer says Charlie Sheen character was based on Oliver Stone. Yeah, Platoon they're talking about there. Striker says, did you like Gary Newman? Yeah, I like some of Gary Newman's songs. Cars is obviously one of his more popular, famous songs. There's another one which I think is called Films. Is it called Films? Where the chorus goes, sometimes I feel like my life's a movie. I think that's called Films, right? So yeah, I like a few Gary Newman songs, definitely. Strangingness says, I remember when I hit like 14, 15-ish, the internet was actually good. You didn't need to go on for a long time. Everything was pretty much free and there was no social media. That was peak time. I agree. In the early 2000s, the internet was good for many things. And dating was one of them. The early 2000s, like, you know, getting girls online, I mean, it was a doddle. Because it was all new, you know? It was a doddle. I met some fine girls online back in the early 2000s. There was one girl who I saw at a grime rave. There used to be a grime rave called Dirty Canvas that I went to a few times. And what was the place called? It was somewhere on the Thames, like right on the banks of the Thames. There was some venue there. I can't remember the name of the place now. But I went to Dirty Canvas a few times and there was some girl there who was like, I want to say she was at least an 8 in looks. I was with some other people and I just never got the opportunity to approach the girl there and then. She was talking to me, it was just, yeah. But when I was on MySpace, 'cause I had a MySpace page back in those days when I was rapping and whatnot, I came across the girl on MySpace and I was like, oh, snap. That's the girl from when I was at Dirty Canvas. So obviously I hollered at her and it was easy getting the digits. There was no weird behavior. There was no flaking, nothing like that. Easy getting the digits, went through, you know, did what I had to do. Easy peasy. That's what it was like in the early days of online dating. It was very, very helpful. Tony says, is it true if you watch Memento backwards, it's the same film? I've not heard that actually. But perhaps. And Strangingness says, I think being fat is a major thing. Women like guys who aren't fat. Yeah, generally, but women are not as impressed by looks as men are. So, you know, it's a mistake to look, and I'm generalizing here, but it's a mistake to view attraction through a male lens when you're thinking about the way that women are attracted to men. Because, for example, there are literally guys who women will call ugly all their lives, right? The guy will grow up in school and everything, and women will say he's ugly, this, that, and the other. As soon as the guy's making money, he's famous, this, that, and you will see women in the comments of videos and interviews with this guy talking about how handsome he is. It doesn't work that way with men. If a woman in school is ugly, right? Even if she loses weight, if she's got an ugly face, it doesn't matter how much money she makes. You're not going to see a bunch of guys saying, oh, wow, she's hot. she's a 10. No. Our perception of attractiveness is far more physical, yeah, than with females. Theirs is more like not purely based on your physical state, but also your socioeconomic status and your charisma and all sorts of other factors can actually make you seem more physically attractive to them. Does that make sense? It's kind of this weird, like, malleable way in which women see you. So I would say that socioeconomic status is a far bigger factor in attracting women than whether you hit the gym or not. Because there are plenty of guys hitting the gym every day still can't get no women. Trust me. In the Western world, I'm talking about. Yeah, other people are wording it different. I said, I was quoting Myron Gaines when he talked about men love idealistically, women love, what was it now? Men love idealistically, women love opportunistically. Yeah. Another way to say it would be unconditional versus conditional. Although I think that saying idealistically versus opportunistically is probably more accurate, because even most men don't love unconditionally. There are some things that a woman could do that would make the man not love the woman anymore, right? In many cases, at least. But idealistically means the man loves the woman in the ideal way that somebody would describe love. You know, ride or die, till death do us part. Men, when they love someone, tend to be more like that. In my experience, what I've seen, so on and so forth. Men tend to be like that more than women in the modern West. Yeah, men tend to be more ride or die. Whereas women tend to be more flaky, and it depends on how your life is going. That will influence how she feels about you. Strangingness says that's why narcissists are getting all the women, because they can pretend to live up to their fantasy perfect guy who's all the rage. Then they find out it's a farce. That's a very good point. All right, Swaggin says I missed the super chat. Tupac or Biggie? Biggie. I get asked that question quite a lot, actually. Tupac or Biggie? I go with Biggie. I think he was a better rapper. From a technical perspective, a better rapper. But I was never really a big fan of either of them, truth be told. Never really a Biggie fan or a Tupac fan. But yeah, stringiness, narcissists getting all the women. I mean, that goes back to the whole treat 'em mean, keep 'em keen thing. Yeah, treating 'em mean, you keep 'em keen, because when a woman feels like you don't need her, then she's more likely to want you. When a woman feels like you need her, in Western society at least, she's often going to be put off. And this is the, I guess, catch-22 of the situation, if that's even the right way to describe it, because most women, in the West at least, it's very different when you go to Africa, for example. In many African countries, women accept that men are going to cheat. They accept it as like a condition of, as just a reality of a relationship. So they go into the relationship expecting the man to have side pieces or whatnot, and they're comfortable with it. In the West, of course, that's not the case. Women want monogamy, but they go for the types of guys who are least likely to be monogamous. So if you've got a guy who doesn't have a big social circle, who isn't that sociable, and who invests everything emotionally and whatever into the relationship that he's got with the woman, that guy, logically and obviously, is more likely to be faithful to the woman. But women are repelled and put off by guys like that. So the guy who's most likely to be monogamous is the type of guy that is unattractive generally to women. But there are plenty of guys like that. Instead, the women will go for not necessarily a narcissistic guy, but narcissistic guys do tend to be popular with women. But let's just say a guy who's popular, right? A guy who's got a happening life and confident, and he doesn't need the woman. Again, remember I talked about mutual dependency? He doesn't need the woman. Therefore, why is he going to be faithful to her? But women seem to think that they can have this perfect man who has charisma, charm, looks, money, status, great social circle, he's sociable, and that guy is somehow going to be monogamous. I mean, yeah, there's a reason they call that a unicorn. In traditional cultures, they're far more realistic about guys like that, women. Like in Africa, when a woman encounters a man who's like that, he's got money and status, she's like, okay, well, yeah, he's going to cheat. It is what it is. And so they go into the relationship with him, accepting that from the get-go. You can't have your cake and eat it in this world. Very few people in this world can have their cake and eat it. Very few people can have their cake and eat it. Shout out to Joseph King for the super chat. He says, 3 hours of Akala's discography or 3 hours of watching Klitschko versus Povetkin on repeat. See, now people are trying to put me literally between a rock and a hard place. Some of these questions are getting sadistic. 3 hours of Akala's discography or Klitschko Povetkin on repeat. That's tough. That is tough. I'm going to go with Klitschko Povetkin on repeat. That's what I'm going to go with. Strangingness says, I knew a dude who was afraid of going outside and managed to constantly get a bunch of chicks. He played guitar and had a sense of humor, but bro wasn't even showering. Broke as fudge. Well, he must have had something about him if he was always getting a bunch of chicks, unless he was just getting dead chicks, yeah? If you're getting chicks who are like 2s and 3s, you know, yeah, anyone could do that. But if he was getting like decent chicks, maybe he was a master swordsman, you know? If you're a master swordsman, word gets around. Girls tell other girls, yeah? I mean, most guys know this anyway, but girls are far more open about their bedroom activities with their friends than guys are. Guys don't really tend to, you know, most guys that I've known over the years and whatnot, we don't really tend to talk that much with our friends about bedroom activities and whatnot. We talk in a very general way. Oh yeah, knock that down or mash that, or you know what I mean? But in terms of like details, what activities we did and what their body was like and what they were good, blah, blah, blah. Men don't tend to do that as much. Women tend to do that a lot. All right. So if you're a master swordsman, if you hung low, etc., then yeah, maybe you can be a hermit and still get women coming round to your house and whatnot. But that's not most guys, right? Most guys are not in that category. Right, Trez says a lot of people are afraid to admit Tupac was a bit of a waste man. I mean, yeah, I was never really a fan of Tupac, the character, the man, or a fan of his music, but would I call him a waste man? I mean, maybe over the fact that he was hustling backwards. You know, you make it out of poverty, you make it to stardom, and then, you know, he never grew up as a gang member or anything like that, Tupac. But once he became famous and successful, now he wants to become a gang member? That's literally hustling backwards. So you could call him a waste man for that, for sure. Why would you hustle backwards like that? It's like he needed validation that much, you know? The last people you need to be validated by are criminals. Because that there lies, that way lies damnation. If you're looking for validation from criminals, oh dear. Because the only way that criminals are going to validate you is if you are willing to get your hands dirty. And why would you be getting your hands dirty if you're successful and famous? Don't make no sense. KS says, Hatman, were you familiar with Nipsey Hussle? I'm familiar with who he is, or who he was. Not so familiar with his music. I'm also familiar that a guy who he was previously in business with, I think he was signed to him, called Big U, has just been arrested. And he's got a bunch of charges on him, including the red rum being connected to the red rum of another rapper. And there's speculation online that it might have been connected to what happened to Nipsey Hussle. Jupiter's String says, best rappers are The Roots and Tribe Called Quest. Well, that's very subjective. They're definitely not my favorite rappers. I mean, I like Tribe Called Quest. I like Tribe Called Quest more than The Roots, personally, like their music. But God, what's the main guy in The Roots rapper? What's his name again? I forget his name. How can I forget his name? What's the main rapper in Roots called? Oh, I forget his name now. My Questlove is Black Thought, thank you. Yeah, Black Thought, from a technical perspective, is better than anybody in Tribe Called Quest. Yeah? In terms of just like spitting bars, multi-syllable flows and rhyme schemes and punchlines, he's better than anybody in Tribe Called Quest from that perspective. But in terms of just like memorable songs, enjoyable songs, I prefer Tribe Called Quest over The Roots. Styles P. Yeah, I like Styles P as a rapper. I like him, as Anthony said there, I like him way better than Tupac. For sure. Ayad says, Hatman, did you like Inception? It wasn't one of my favorite Nolan movies, truth be told. It was cool, but it wasn't really my favorite of his. Volume on Max says, did you ever come across characters like Uncle Trevor from Kidulthood, Real Gangsters? Are they still around in London? Of course they're still around in London. Yeah. I came across many killers, gangsters, and all sorts of unsavory characters in my life. Yeah. Many people like that. I mean, growing up in Brixton in the 80s and 90s, you couldn't get away from them. You walk down the street and they're outside every day, hanging about. The shooters, and the olders might call you over to evaluate you to see if you could be a runner for them or something like that. That used to happen. One of the olders call you like, yo, come here. Yeah. Jupiter String says, I also like some of the Wu-Tang like RZA, but it's too ghetto for me. Too ghetto for you, okay. Wu-Tang, they were from the ghetto, but they didn't really make stereotypical ghetto music for the most part. Only like Raekwon and Ghostface made like typical ghetto music. The rest of them were more artistic and a bit more highbrow in the type of music they made. Like the Genius, RZA, Inspector Deck, even Method Man. Method Man didn't really make like, could you call that ghetto music? I mean, there was a ghetto element to it, but he wasn't what you would call a gangster rapper or a street rapper, Method Man, at all. Anthony says Method Man was a dust head. Yeah, so many of the Wu-Tang were dust heads. Loads of them were dust heads. Dust, we're talking about, Angel Dust here, PCP. Loads of them were dust heads. And coke heads too. But in terms of the music he made, yeah, in terms of the music he made, he wasn't really a gangster rapper. He wasn't really ghetto like that. Yeah, shout out to John. If everyone can stick a like on this stream, it really helps. Big up, big up. First round boxing says, Hatman, who are your favorite stand-up comedians? Well, today stand-up comedy is dead. I mean, it's just overly dead. No point in even looking at stand-up comedy now. No point looking at it. But back in the days, I liked Richard Pryor. Chris Rock for a while was good. But probably my favorite above those two was maybe Eddie Murphy when he was in his prime. Doing Raw and was Eddie Murphy Raw? What was the other one? Delirious and Raw. So it was maybe Eddie Murphy back in the days. But there were, many other stand-up comedians I liked. In fact, Dave Chappelle, not the post-South Africa Dave Chappelle, because now he's just weird. He looks traumatized or something, Dave Chappelle now, ever since he left the Dave Chappelle show and went to South Africa. When he came back from South Africa to the United States, he just seemed like a weird guy. I don't know what's wrong with him. Not funny anymore. But Jupiter String says, Hatman, have you ever listened to R&B for Gyal? Never in my life. R&B's always been banned around me. That's a whole fact. But yeah, what was I saying now? I've lost my train of thought. Someone remind me what I was saying. I forgot what I was saying a few seconds ago. How's that for old age? Oh yeah, Dave Chappelle. Excuse me, Dave Chappelle. Yeah, he was one of my favorite stand-up comedians for a long time. His old stuff. So he was definitely up there. In fact, he might have been my favorite. Yeah, let me replace Eddie Murphy with the old Dave Chappelle, the pre-South Africa Dave Chappelle. He was probably my favorite. And then after him, Eddie Murphy. Yeah, I liked Richard Pryor in movies as well. Some people are talking about Richard Pryor. I liked Richard Pryor movies, like Stir Crazy, Brewster's Millions and stuff like that. Richard Pryor always had this wide-eyed demeanor about him. His eyes are always wide open and he's clueless about what's going on. And yeah, Richard Pryor was funny. KS says Aries Spears is hilarious. I don't find him funny at all. I don't think Aries Spears is funny at all. If you're talking about some American comedians these days who are somewhat funny, Godfrey, at least with his impressions, is funny. Godfrey does fantastic impressions, way better than Aries Spears. Aries Spears impressions are rubbish. Godfrey's impressions are actually very good. His Denzel's fantastic. He does a pretty good Jason Statham in small doses. When he tries to talk too much, then it starts to break down and his English accent doesn't sound great. But in small doses for a few lines here or there, his Jason Statham is fantastic. His Denzel's the best I've ever seen or heard. Cat Williams, yeah, I've never found Cat Williams funny. I've never found, I know a lot of people like him, but I don't know. Never found him funny. Manu Minute says, my all-time comic is probably Paul Mooney. Yeah, the only thing I found Cat Williams funny in was the Boondocks. For those of you who are familiar with that, he played a character called a pimp named Slickback. Yeah, I know Bill Hicks. Yeah, for sure. 4 Fox, Bill Hicks, and also who's the other one now? I forget his name. The guy who used to say, "It's a big club and you ain't in it." What's that guy's name again? He gets quoted so often. Bill Hicks and the other guy. No, not Bill Burr. George Carlin. Thank you, Marley Worth. George Carlin. That's the one. George Carlin. Anthony says, any UK stand-ups? 0. I can't think of any UK stand-ups that I really found funny, to be honest. I mean, just reeling off some UK stand-ups there's been over the years. Lenny Henry. Ricky Gervais. Some people like his stand-up. Me, I'm like, Who was that guy that was always sweating and like running all over the stage and just constantly sweating with big ears? I can't remember his name. Gina Yashari. Oh, she was terrible. Lee Evans. That's the one. Yeah. Lee Evans. I don't know why people found him funny. He was just like this sweaty guy pacing up and down the stage in this manic, just weird, man. Peter Kay, I mean, if you like a bit of Northern Butlin's holiday camp humor, Peter Kay, you know. Phoenix Nights and all that. Frankie Boyle, nah. Ayed says Peter Kay is awful now. But you know, humor is obviously subjective. What I find funny, other people might not, and vice versa. Billy Connolly, I mean, I like him in movies. Didn't think his stand-up was amazing. Are we going to bring up Jasper Carrot next? I already said that Gina Yashari is not funny. You've asked me that twice. Gina Yashari is not funny at all. Richard Blackwood, I mean, he was alright for a time doing stand-up. He was alright. It was nothing incredible, but he was alright. Kyle says British stand-up is dreadful. Yeah, it's not a scratch on American stand-up in my opinion. For my taste, American stand-up has always been far superior. Strangingness says, random, I think fighters from up north have better foot speed and hand speed than down south. I'd have to meditate on that one. I'd have to think about that one. Because you've had some fast fighters from down south. Plenty of them. David Haye, fast. George Groves, fast. I mean, Anthony Joshua, in terms of hand speed, particularly when he was younger, fast. Shout out to Hainu for the super chat. He says, what is your setup? Due to travel, took a gamble on a Snapdragon Surface Pro 32 gigabyte RAM, so on and so forth, hoping latency apps. All right, so in terms of my setup, I've got a MacBook Pro M1. I bought this a few years ago. It costs like $2,500. I forget all of the specs inside it in terms of the RAM I got with it and all that type of stuff, but it's a MacBook Pro. An M1 MacBook Pro. As far as my other stuff, the microphone I use, I use several different microphones, but my main workhorse microphone is an SM7DB. Not that, if you're not a content creator, then it's not gonna be relevant to you, but for those who are interested, I use a Shure SM7DB. So it's the standard, it's become industry standard now, podcasting mic that you're used to on Joe Rogan and all that type of stuff. It's that mic, but it's the new version of that mic, which has an inbuilt preamp, because the SM7B is notoriously gain hungry because it's a dynamic mic and not a condenser mic. So therefore, I'm talking technical audio equipment jargon that a lot of people is going to go over their head. But for those who understand, it's a dynamic mic, which means that you have to have an audio interface that has basically a volume knob on it that you can turn up very, very high to make up for the low sensitivity of dynamic mics. Dynamic mics are very low sensitive, so you have to have an interface that has a lot of gain on it, yeah? Whereas if you're using a condenser, you don't need much gain. Whereas with the SM7DB, it's got a built-in preamp, which means that you don't need as much gain on your audio interface to use it. Anyway, I've got a few interfaces. One of them is called the PodTrack P4. That's what I'm using right now to stream, is the PodTrack P4. I've also got, what's the name of the other one now? A Go XLR, but that is Windows only, so I don't tend to use it as much. I do have a Windows laptop as well, but I don't tend to use that as much. But the Go XLR's got a lot of effects and all sorts of other stuff on there. But yeah, I guess that's my setup. And I've also got a Motu M2 audio interface. So I've got several interfaces, several microphones, and so on. And the microphone on the MacBook is actually pretty good. But in order for it to sound good, you really have to be close, like very close. Because if you're sitting at a comfortable distance away, then it's going to sound thin and kind of harsh. But if you're relatively close to the MacBook Pro microphone, it sounds actually pretty damn good. Now, Kyle says, in terms of music and media, USA trumps the UK. I'm not sure I agree with that. In terms of movies, the USA definitely trumps the UK. But in terms of music, I don't know about that. The UK has been very, very strong with music over the years. Very, very strong. Over the decades. UK has been very, very strong. In fact, I would say that the UK actually punches above its weight with music. Strangingness says America copies all our TV shows. Well, a couple. A British TV show. I don't know about all of them. A couple of them. Being The Office is an example. There's a few others, but most American TV shows, as far as I'm aware, are originals. They're not rip-offs of UK TV shows. Now, 4Fox says, what mic did you rap with? Loads of different mics, but the mic that I had in my home studio for many years was a, what's it called now? What's the brand called? I forget the name. Oh my gosh, what is that brand called? Let me just do a quick search and see if I can find the name of the mic I used to use. Hold tight. The mic I used to use was an SE Electronics. I think it was a 2200A. SE Electronics 2200A. That's the one I recorded a lot of music with back in the days in my home studio. But when I would go to proper studios, there would be all sorts of different mics. Now, Wake Up says England's in a great place musically. Well, I don't know about modern music, but like historically, Britain's been strong with regards to music. Obviously, you had the so-called British invasion with the Beatles and whatnot in the 60s, and all throughout the 70s and even the 80s, Britain was punching above its weight with music. Britain had a lot of influence. You know, British artists had a lot of influence in America. You know, people like Phil Collins and Sting. And it's kind of funny. Phil Collins, for some weird reason, gained a reputation in the British media of being like uncool, and he would just constantly get slated by the British media. I'm not sure why that is, because in America, Phil Collins was wildly popular and probably still is. And somebody, you know, earlier on in the stream mentioned Gary Newman, and there were so many British acts and artists that were very, very popular all over the world, but certainly even in the United States and influential in the United States. Obviously, you had groups like Queen, so on and so forth, AC/DC, Black Sabbath, and yeah. Ayad says, do we punch above our weight in boxing? Definitely in the heavyweight division. Kyle says, in your top 10 rappers of all, why don't you have a UK rapper? Because I don't like him as much. Although I don't think I've ever done a top 10 rappers list that I can remember anyway. If I have, I've forgotten about it, but I don't tend to do them kind of lists because they're so subject to change. Shout out to Jordan for the super chat. He says, dating advice for men in their early 30s. Well, as I was saying earlier on, you do what you can do to elevate yourself socioeconomically. You try and be as sociable as you can within reason, right? These things will help your chances to some extent. But if you're still struggling and you're still not getting anywhere, then as I said earlier on, as I've been advising since 2017 on Patreon, you need to get out of the country. Assuming you're in a Western country, you need to get out of the country. You need to go to a traditional society and make connections there, start socializing there, and you'll find that there are far more women who are agreeable, who are willing to, you know, work with you in a relationship and whatnot and build something. You'll find it a lot easier in traditional cultures. Again, date down. Look for women who are lower than you socioeconomically, because women are hypergamous. Hypergamy is real, so date down. I never understood this thing where, and you know, most guys don't do this, most guys that have any sense, but there are a lot of guys out there, I guess metrosexual modern men, who are looking for a woman that's highly educated and has got this really high earning potential and all this type of stuff. I mean, yeah, that's a ticking time bomb, bro. If she's out earning you, and that's a ticking time bomb. I mean, there are plenty of guys who end up with women like that who don't necessarily get with them because of those things. That's different. But I'm talking about the guys who actually seek women. Oh, she's got the education and she's got this, that. It's like, are you looking for a woman to provide for you? Is that what you're looking for? You one of those type of guys? Like, yeah, good luck with that. Unofficial official says, do you have any of your music online? Yes, I do. I'll get the graphic up on screen. There you go. The link is in the description. It's called The Bottomless Drink. It's a Rumble channel. Several of my old tracks have been uploaded there. And to give you a couple of recommendations based upon feedback, Moses is a very popular track. People really like that one. Wounded in Action is another very popular track that gets great feedback. And even The New World, a lot of people like The New World as well, because it talks about topics that are very popular points of discussion today. So check out those ones. These are all old mixtape tracks from back in the days. But Wounded in Action, a lot of people like it. Moses and The New World. Yeah, so check out those in particular, but have a listen to all of them. And one of them, which is Moses, you'll actually see me on camera. The others is just got a still shot of me, whereas Moses, you'll actually see me moving about. Let's just say that. So click the link in the description. Let me check that it still is in the description. I think it is. Last I checked. Yeah, my music on Rumble. Just click that link and you'll be taken there. Here's some fire bars. There you go. So shout out to you. Shout out to Jordan Anderson again for the last super chat. Now, 4 Fox says, if you got enough viewers, would you ever make a new EP? Well, I've spoken, again, particularly on Patreon, about creativity. Now, I'm generalizing here, but my observation and my experience is that creativity peaks when you're young, when you're maybe even in your 20s, sometimes even early 20s. For most creative people, musicians and so on, that's when they hit their creative peak. As you get older, you get less good ideas musically, lyrically, and so on. You know, for me as a writer, a rapper, a lyricist, lyrics would come to me and song ideas and whatnot would come to me in waves. So I get like waves of creativity. And once the wave hits, and you can never tell when it hits, yeah? You go through long periods of having writer's block, and no matter what, you know, I don't know how many times you sit down and try to write on the pad, nothing good is coming out. But then you get these waves that come out of nowhere, where your mind is flooded with all these rhymes and all these concepts and all these ideas. And you have to ride the wave. You have to do as much writing and what have you as possible when the wave comes. Yeah? That's how creativity always worked for me as a lyricist. And what happens is when you get older, those waves become less and less frequent. In my 20s, those waves were coming all the time, you know, sometimes few weeks, sometimes every few months. It was a regular thing. And as you get older in your 30s and 40s, those waves are once in a blue moon. You know, once in a blue moon. And this is why most musicians do the vast majority of their best work when they're young. They make most of their classic material when they're young. They don't tend to do it when they're in their 30s and 40s, certainly not 40s, 50s, right? They do it when they're young because for some reason, the creative energy and power isn't as great when you get older, generally speaking. With that being said, I do still have a few bullets in the clip. And it takes time because the waves are so infrequent, but I've been building certain things up, you know, certain tracks that I've been working on for even months or years that are now starting to come to fruition with beats and song structure and all that type of stuff. So I'm not going to put any type of timeline on it, but there probably will be new music coming out. So, yeah. Shout out to Jordan Anderson again for the super chat. He says, do you smoke weed? No, I don't. Don't drink, don't smoke. I haven't drunk alcohol for 7 years. And in terms of weed, I mean, God, when was the last time I bun a spliff? Last time I bun a spliff might have been 2008, something like that, maybe. Yeah, Bullock says Moses and Bricky are the 2 best tracks on the Rumble channel. Yeah, I forgot about that. Bricky 98. A lot of people like that track as well. That's over an old Mobb Deep beat called Godfather Part 3, which uses a Scarface sample. Yeah, a lot of people like Bricky 98 as well. So if you're checking out my music on the Rumble channel, check out Bricky 98. That's another favorite. But that's street stuff. Yeah, that's when somebody's saying they're not really like into ghetto type rap. Well, that's ghetto. Bricky 98, very ghetto. Fee Khabib says teetotal Hatman. I feel like alcohol brings out the worst in everyone. Very evil substance. Yeah, I don't want to say the worst in everyone, but the worst in many people, certainly. You know, not to be pedantic. But yeah, I started drinking a lot less. I mean, I was never really a regular drinker at any time in my life. I went through phases where I was drinking quite regularly, but never for like a whole year, you know? The only times I've really been drunk were as a teenager, like blind drunk and can't walk, was as a teenager. And I really started cutting down on drink once I became a bouncer, because I saw what it was like to be around drunk people when you're sober. And I just used to look at these people coming in drunk and the people inside the clubs, and I was like, this is disgusting. I got all snobbish about it. I was like, this is disgusting. And so after being a bouncer, I never really got drunk. I would drink here and there, you know, feel a little vibe, but I'd never really get drunk after I was a bouncer. I was like, nah, man, it's not the one. Strangingness says most creative people are mentally ill, myself included. I wouldn't go that far. I would say that most creative people have suffered pain in their lives, hardship and challenge, because so much of the best music, for example, and art is born out of hardship. For whatever reason, you know, we could analyze the psychology behind that, but 4 Fox says, empty the clip, Hatman, drop the music. When it's ready, the clip will be empty, trust me. But yeah, so much creativity comes out of hardship. And maybe that's another reason why I haven't been as creative in my 30s and 40s, because my life is easier than it was in my 20s. My life in my 20s was hard, bro. It was a hard life. A hard life. And when your life is hard, you got a lot of stuff to write about. Do you know what I mean? 4 Fox says, Wounded in Action is the best one. To be honest, real ones remember it from the Element group. There you go. That's an example. If somebody wants to hear an example of something I wrote when I was going through a very hard time in my life, then check out Wounded in Action. Check out that track. That's all about the pain and the suffering and the tough times and dark places that I was in. Yeah, Wounded in Action. So yeah, so much great creativity comes out of hardship. Shout out to Bullocks, it says you cater for all topics, so it's all good. Big up. Jupiter String says classic beat. Yeah, that's another Mobb Deep beat. Produced by, I think, The Alchemist produced that beat. Correct me if I'm wrong. Vincent says alcohol removes inhibitions. Does that mean people are more sinister beneath? Well, you know, I think it definitely removes inhibitions, but at the same time, I think that alcohol can change your brain chemistry to the extent that it isn't necessarily removing inhibitions, but it's actually making you a different person for the period that you're drunk. Does that make sense? there are certain things that you will be inhibited about, and alcohol will remove that. And, they say that, what is it now? A drunk person speaks a sober mind, whatever it is. Yeah, there's an element of that. But I also think that alcohol can change your brain chemistry to the extent that you will do things that you wouldn't even want to do, that you had no desire to do, even secretly to do when you were sober. So this is where the idea, with regards to people who are spiritually inclined, the idea that alcohol can actually open you up to malevolent spiritual forces and they can quote unquote possess you. So I don't think it's either or. I think it is both. Now, with regards to spiritual forces, that's obviously a very, could I call it a controversial topic? Because some people don't believe in the spirit world, but I like to try and talk about and make spirituality more palatable to, let's say, materialist reductionist types by talking in terms of spirit being a projection of consciousness, because consciousness is a very mysterious thing. Science doesn't understand what consciousness is or why it exists. There's no explanation in science for why consciousness exists and why we're not just biological robots. Why do we need to be conscious? What is the function of it? Why do we need to be sentient, Because it's presumed and assumed that a lot of lower life forms are not conscious, that they are biological robots, essentially. A lot of more simple life forms. So consciousness is very mysterious. And so perhaps in the way that in Tibetan Buddhism, they've got this concept of a tulpa. I don't know how many of you have heard of a tulpa. Shout out to Jordan Anderson. I'm going to come onto your super chat again in a second. In fact, no, let me read it out. And if I forget my chain of thought here, remember I'm talking about tulpas and projecting consciousness. Let me read out Jordan Anderson's super chat. It says, have you done a career review of James Toney? No, I haven't, but that is definitely the most requested career review. Definitely the most requested one I've ever got. And I will get around to that eventually. Shout out to Jordan Anderson. James Toney was one of my favorite fighters of the 1990s. Loved his style. A very aggressive character. Trash talker. Great chin. The Philly shell defense. Incredible counter puncher. Fast hands. His best years were at 160 pounds and 168. He had those great fights with Mike McCallum. The Roy Jones Jr. fight was obviously the beginning of, not necessarily the beginning of the end, but the beginning of a downturn in his career was when he fought Roy Jones Jr. But yeah, his best years at 160, obviously knocking out Michael Nunn for the title at 160 when he was kind of an unknown. He did a great job that night. So I will eventually get around to doing a career review of James Toney. But shout out to Jordan Anderson for the super chat. Much appreciated. Okay, what was I talking about now? Yeah, projecting consciousness. Like in Tibetan Buddhism, they've got this concept of what they call a tulpa. And so my thinking, my suspicion, I'm not going to say that I believe this wholeheartedly, but I entertain this as a concept and a possibility, is that spirits are a projection of collective human consciousness. So they're not like independent, or they're not necessarily independent, sentient, etheric beings, but they are an aspect, an extension of the collective unconscious, which can, by some not yet understood or scientifically detected mechanism, can influence the thoughts, the feelings, and the emotions of individual people. That's what I suspect spirits and demons actually are. It's some type of projection of human consciousness. Shout out to Jordan Anderson again for the super chat. He says, do you have a mindfulness practice? Not as such. I'm a very free-spirited. We were talking about spirits. I'm a very free-spirited person, and I am not someone that tends to stick to routines and regiments. That's what my personality is like, yeah? And that's why I found it so difficult in school, because in school, it's like routine regiment. That's why I found it so difficult when I was an employee, because employees have to stick to routines and regiments. I get so bored in routine and regiment. I find it very difficult to stick to routine and regiment. So some people are going to say, you sound like you got ADHD. Maybe I do. Who knows? I've never been for a diagnosis. But, and then again, you know, what is ADHD? Maybe it's just a personality type that has nothing wrong with it, but it's being forced, it's being pigeonholed into a particular box, you know, that it wasn't designed for. It's like hunter-gatherers. You take a hunter-gatherer and put him in a cubicle in an office, he's not going to be happy, is he? They're going to call him ADHD or something. So, yeah, I'm a very free-spirited person. I don't tend to even have my own routines and regiments for very long. I tend to change my routines and change the things that I do all the time. Yeah? So I don't necessarily have a mindfulness practice that I would stick to, you know, for any length of time. The best way to like characterize my personality type and the way my mind works is I am an explorer. I'm intrepid. I'm always looking for new, different, I'm always trying to discover without and also within. Iron's analysis says, Hatman, what age are you no longer young anymore? I mean, that's subjective, but it's a very good question. What age are you no longer young anymore? Jupiter String says tulpas are real. Have you seen one? I mean, I'm open to them being, you know, possibly being real. I'm just asking, like, genuinely, have you seen one? What age are you no longer young? Let's throw it over to the chat. Iron's analysis. In the chat, you guys tell me, what age would you have to be to no longer be considered young? What do you guys think in the chat? Jimbo says 35. What say the rest of you? What age are you no longer considered young, in your opinion? Someone says 36, 40, 35. Someone says 30. I would say it depends on whether you're male or female, for one. I think that old for a woman is younger than it is for a man. Do you know what I mean? I think women age out earlier than men do in terms of when they're considered old. Yeah, women age out earlier. A man, if he keeps himself in shape and if he still has a young energy about him, might still be looked at or considered young or treated as if he's young, maybe up until he's in his mid-30s, possibly late 30s. Yeah? Whereas for a woman, really when they hit 30, they're kind of old. I mean, really when they hit 30, in a lot of people's eyes, they're kind of old already. So I think women age out a bit earlier. And the reason I say that is because a woman's value is more dependent on her looks than a man's value is. So for that reason, women tend to age out a bit earlier. Shout out to Jordan Anderson again for the super chat. He says, thoughts on the current Labour UK government? There's people laughing at the question. I mean, I call Keir Starmer Keir Starlin. And thoughts on the current UK government? I mean, my thoughts on the current UK government is, I don't think I've ever seen or heard anyone say anything good about them. And I can't imagine why anybody would. Ayad says, bring Rishi back. Well, funny enough, when Rishi was basically getting, when the public were turning on Rishi, I was saying at the time on Patreon, yeah, Rishi's not great. But if they bring bloody Stalin in, right, Starmer, you're going to be begging to have Rishi back. I'm telling you. You're going to be begging to have Rishi back if they bring that guy in. Good God, man. Strangingness says, I don't know, a lot of women in their 40s and 50s who still look really good with nice skin because of the gym and that. I wouldn't even dream of dating a woman my age. Wouldn't dream of it. They don't look good to me. They look washed. Even the ones who have, gone to the gym and this, that, and the other, and they're drinking their smoothies and, yeah, nah. Jupiter String says, I haven't seen a tulpa because I don't engage in juju, but I know people that claim to have from other cultures. So yeah, shout out to Jordan Anderson again for that question about thoughts on the current Labour UK government. I've never been someone that has much faith in politics. I don't engage in it. Politicians are just liars by default. Tell you what you want to hear to get your vote and then disregard everything that they promised you. That's all I've seen all my life looking at politicians. So I don't rely on them. So many people think that politicians are going to fix their life and fix this and fix that. If you don't have money in your circle, and I'm talking about real money, millions in your circle, or even billions within your social group, business group, then politicians don't give a damn about what you think. Yeah? They listen to the money. They're not going to listen to the average Joe. They're listening to like lobbyists and stuff like that. The corporate world and bankers and, mercenary companies and what have you. That's who they take their orders from. They just don't tell you that. They pretend that they're taking their orders from the average man, the average woman. No, they're not. They're taking the orders from lobbyists and what have you. So unless you're in that bracket, and I'm not telling you what to do. If you want to vote for whoever, that's your business. But I'm telling you my view of things is, I'm not in that bracket, so I don't even bother with voting or anything like that because they're not going to do anything that I would want them to do anyway. So neither of the main parties in the UK are saying or doing anything that would really benefit me in any major way, and that's been the case throughout most of my life, so I just don't engage with it, Shout out to Jordan Anderson again for the super chat. He says, what do you think has the highest ceiling in pro boxing, or who do you think, has the highest ceiling in pro boxing, Tommy Fury or Campbell Hatton? Well, Campbell Hatton. Who's got the highest ceiling? I'm going to say Tommy Fury. Yeah, I'm going to say Tommy Fury's got the highest ceiling than Campbell Hatton. I'm going to say Tommy Fury. Who do you think? Jordan Anderson. Do you think it's Tommy Fury or Campbell? Because Tommy Fury does have above average athleticism. Let's be fair to him. He does. Whereas Campbell Hatton doesn't. Neither guy is great technically. But yeah, because Tommy Fury has better athleticism than Campbell Hatton, then I'd go with Tommy Fury. And JDM says Tommy Fury isn't a pro anymore. He's a YouTube fighter. I can't disagree, but I still think he's got a higher ceiling than Campbell Hatton. Fernie G says, what annual salary is considered middle class in the UK? Would it be maybe the median income, which would be the average? Would that be considered middle class? I guess it depends on the region of the UK that you live in. In London, to be considered middle class, you probably have to be earning maybe 60 grand a year or more to be considered middle class at least. Whereas in other parts of the UK where the cost of living is much cheaper, maybe 40 grand. You might be classed as middle class if you're earning at least 40 grand. But in London, I would say it would probably have to be at least 60 grand for you to be considered middle class. EJ says, I think class is more than just salary in the UK. That's true. It is. Class is more than just salary in the UK, but salary is an aspect of it. In the UK, and this isn't so much of a thing in America. In America, you do have, accents that are related to class, but it's a lot more pronounced, at least in generations gone by. It's a lot more pronounced in the UK. Yeah, and I spoke about this in a previous live stream as well, where even in a place like Scotland, working class people, the ones I've encountered anyway, have a very different accent to upper middle class people in Scotland. Upper middle class Scottish people have a very, very soft accent. In some cases, you can barely even tell they're Scottish, whereas the strongest accents tend to be quote unquote poor people. So in Britain, there's a lot of that, right? There's certain accents that you would associate with middle class or what have you. But then you've got this kind of, and I guess Essex is a good example. I spoke about this in a previous stream as well, where in Essex, you have a lot of families who were working class a generation or two ago, and probably still are culturally working class, and certainly in terms of their accent, they're working class. But financially, you would say they're middle class. Like the Fishers, right? Johnny Fisher and his dad. Johnny Fisher's dad, a working class guy, saved up his money through driving cabs or whatever other stuff he was doing to make money. Moved the family presumably out from Essex. I'm guessing here, but a lot of working class British families did this in the 90s and whatnot. They became upwardly mobile, and they moved out from South London, the council estates and whatnot, poor areas of South London and East London, and they moved out to Essex and the home counties, Kent and whatever, Essex. And even though financially they might seem middle class because they've got nice houses and cars and whatever, they still talk working class. Eddie Hearn is an example of it. Eddie Hearn grew up in a mansion, yet he talks with what in Britain would be considered a working class accent. And Essex is a big area for that, where you find people that make a lot of money, but they have working class accents. I'm not aware of too many other parts of the UK that have that dynamic. Normally you go to affluent areas of the UK where people have got money and they don't have working class accents. You know what I mean? But in Essex, they do. You find a lot of them. Yeah, King Khan summed it up a lot more succinctly there. On Essex, the Cockneys that moved out of London generations ago. Yeah, that's basically what it is. To sum it up a lot better than I did, yes. Shout out to Matthew Jukes. He says, I'm going to have to rewatch this stream. I've missed it all. Moses is fire, by the way. Hope you're good. Big up Matthew Jukes. Yeah, a lot of people like the Moses track I did. Let me change the visuals. I've had this on screen for too long. Let's put The Night Flight back on. That's the name of the show, The Night Flight. which is a title, a name for the show that I did borrow from an old school DJ on Choice FM called Commander B. And he would have rappers on sometimes, battling each other on some occasions. Famously, Dizzy Rascal going up against Asher D and Soul Solid. And whenever it would get a bit heated, Commander B would shout, "Turbulence, turbulence." Yeah, big up anyone who remembers Commander B. Turbulence, turbulence. Arco says the Fisher household is like a 5-minute drive from me. Which part of Essex do they live in? Is it Harold Wood? Do they live in Harold Wood? I think they live in Harold Wood, right? Which is next to Romford. Unless I'm getting my geography mixed up. Because I've been Harold Wood many, many times because they've got a boxing store down there called BoxFit, which is the best boxing store, or at least it has the widest range that I'm aware of boxing equipment of any boxing store around the London area, right? Because it's just outside of London in Essex, Harold Wood. I think the Fishers live in Harold Wood. If you live next door to them, then you should, or around the corner from them, then you should be able to tell me. Donage says the dynamic also exists in Dorking. Romford, okay, yeah. And Harold Wood is just next to Romford, right? Okay, we got this idiot calling himself Bass. Not me, Spark Out. He couldn't knock a W-A-N-K out. You donut. You're a weirdo. Wannabe rapper, not an actual rapper. You're a bum. You get a life, man. Trolling the chat with your stupidity. Nobody cares about your life. No one cares about your life. Your little soccer account. You're a waste, man. Not me, Spark Out. You wouldn't even dare to look in my direction if you saw me in real life. Wouldn't dare. That's a whole fact. Arco says, Romford, bro. Also, Boxfit is literally 30-second walk from my office. Okay, so you're on that same... Because Boxfit is like on an industrial estate. So I guess is your office on that same estate? King Khan says, I was in Southend for a private medical checkup. It was like I was in the 1960s, East London. Is Southend really like that? I mean, I've been to Southend many times. And obviously in the summer. I've never been to Southend in the wintertime, I don't think. In the summer, Southend is just full of people from London. Yeah. Southend is just full of people from London. Chainsaw says, Hatman, did you have any mates that joined the military? Zero. No. Never had any friends that joined the military. No. Not at all. Dee says, love your accent, Hatman. Are you from the States? Jordan Addison with a super chat again. He says, how do you define masculinity? How would I define masculinity? I would distill it down to the typical gender roles you find in the animal kingdom among mammals. So, among mammals, the male is the protector. First and foremost, that's one of the male's main roles, is to protect the females, to protect the children. So that's an aspect of masculinity. And in fulfilling that role, the male has to defend challenges from other males. So the male has to be, the male has to be respected. It has to have, a certain physical presence, a certain level of confidence, a certain level of mental toughness, right? And it has to have attributes which are attractive to females. Some of the attributes I've just described. So that is how I would broadly define masculinity. It's having attributes that are respected by other males and that are attractive to females. Akia says, by physical presence, do you mean muscle? That's an aspect of it, yeah. That's an aspect of it. So, a skinny man who's like, 120 pounds or whatever, he won't be perceived by other men as being as dangerous as a man who's like, 6'5" and he's a wall of muscle, right? So that's an aspect of masculinity, is the physical, yeah. But it's not just physical, that's one aspect, it's also the behavior. And so with human beings in particular, different from animals, the physical aspect of masculinity isn't as important for humans as it is for animals, because humans can use weapons. Humans can have gangs, armies, security, whatever the case may be, where their own physical hand-to-hand combat ability is not enough. So to some extent, a male can outsource the physical aspect of their masculinity if they have the means. Iron's analysis says, I've seen Dean White in public near me. He's an absolute unit. Yeah, he's a very big guy. Dean White is a very, very big guy. Must be 6'6", 6'7". Got a huge neck on him. A very big man. Villaga says, real masculinity is to put family before himself and believe in God. That's definitely not the way I would define it. I mean, putting family before himself, that's an aspect, but believing in God, I don't think that's got anything to do with masculinity. There's plenty of men who believe in God that are not masculine at all. So I don't see that as any kind of aspect of masculinity whatsoever, personally. Shout out to Harry in the chat. Yes, yes. King Khan makes a great point. He says, I think that's moral, but doesn't have to be masculine. Although that's subjective, Believing in God, does it make you a better person? I think what makes you a good person is your actions, your works, not what you believe in terms of spirituality. KS says, surprisingly, Boatsy was a bit of a unit as well. Yeah, I've seen Boatsy in person myself. I saw him in Thornton Heath, Tesco, many years ago. Yeah, and he's a solid 6'2". King Khan says, sure, you can pray but still be a scumbag. You can pray and still be a coward, So I don't think believing in God has any bearing on how masculine you are. Iron's analysis says, Hatman, do you think John Fury is masculine? Yes, he is. John Fury is masculine, for sure. I could say a lot of critical things about him, but he is a masculine man, for sure, definitely. Jimbo says, are you watching Zapita versus Farmer tonight? We'll see. I've got a few things to do when I get off this stream, which will be fairly shortly. So if anyone else wants to get their questions in, obviously I prioritize super chats. I will be winding this down in a few minutes. Iron's analysis says, won't fight Mickey Theo, though. Well, a ghost always knows who he can scare. So even the most masculine guy is probably going to have someone that he doesn't fancy fighting. We see that in boxing all the time. Tony says, how do you see Joyce Hrgovic going? I reckon Hrgovic will win on points. That's what I'm going with. Hrgovic on points. It's a good fight. Joe Joyce beat him in a WSB back in the days. In a very high-paced fight. He just outworked him and outmuscled him when they fought in the WSB. Fernie G says, Hatman, what 90s journeyman heavyweight do you think who would have had the best chance to capture a title today? 90s journeyman heavyweight. Well, again, it depends on how you define journeyman, because Oliver McCall was called a journeyman by much of the boxing media and the broadcasters. They would refer to McCall as a journeyman. When he fought Lennox Lewis, they called him a journeyman. And McCall obviously won the fight, the first fight. Buster Douglas was referred to as a journeyman. So it depends on how you define journeyman. Neither one of those guys, in my mind, would have beat Usyk. And I wouldn't have picked McCall to beat Usyk or even Dubois, to be honest. So let me think of other journeymen who may have been able to be champions today, beat Dubois, because that's basically what you'd have to be asking, right? Are there any journeymen from the 90s who could beat Daniel Dubois, in my opinion? Not that I can think of off the top of my head. Because I can think of a lot of journeymen, but no one that I would pick. There were journeymen like Garing Lane. There were people like Burt Cooper. There were journeymen like Michael Hunter Sr., be really considered a journeyman or maybe a fringe contender. What other journeyman can I think of now? Garing Lane, Ross Purity was more like late 90s, early 2000s. He was a journeyman, tough guy. He obviously beat Klitschko. Official says Jeremy Williams against the right champion. Could have won a belt possibly. I guess towards the back end. Jeremy Williams, was he really a journeyman? He was more of like a fringe contender, but you know, these are subjective terms, right? Jeremy Williams, he was very chinny, Jeremy Williams. Very, very chinny. He got sparked out by Sam Peter in 2 rounds. That was a brutal knockout. Brutal knockout. Nah, Razor Ruddock wasn't a journeyman. Razor Ruddock was a contender. He was definitely a contender. He was never classed as a journeyman in the 90s. He was always a contender. Maurice Harris, yeah, he was a journeyman. But he was very chinny too. Very, very chinny. Valaga says George Chuvalo had the best chin in history. I don't know about the best chin in history, but he definitely had one of the best chins in history. Or you could say he had the best chin you ever saw. Because, of course, we don't all know every chin in history. Do you know what I mean? That's why I'm reluctant to say he had the best chin in history, because we haven't seen all the fighters with great chins necessarily. But, yeah, George Chuvalo had a fantastic chin. Never dropped. Stopped, yes. Foreman stopped him, but never down. But Oliver McCall was also never down in his career, ever. Apparently not even in sparring. And of course, he was a sparring partner for Mike Tyson for many years. You can see some of the sparring sessions that they had on YouTube. Tony says, are there any journeymen today you think with the right training, etc., had potential? I always thought Johnny Rice could have done something. Yeah, Johnny Rice does have something about him. He actually reminds me a little bit of Buster Douglas. You know, the way he fights and his build and everything. Jonathan Rice is a bit Buster Douglas-esque. But success is more than just the ability and the physical aspect. It's also the mental aspect. And some of these journeymen just don't have the right mindset or the right mental strength. You know? The ability to perform under the bright lights. Some of them just don't have it upstairs to make the most of their physical ability. Ben, shout out to Ben for the super chat. He says, do you rate Sugar Ray Robertson highly? In terms of his record, yes. And the limited amount of footage that exists of Sugar Ray Robertson is impressive, but you have to bear in mind that there's no footage that I'm aware of Sugar Ray Robertson in his prime. All of the footage that I know of existing and that I've seen is when he's actually not necessarily over the hill, but when his best days are kind of behind him. So, when he was on his run where he went like 80 fights unbeaten or so, he had a loss on his record already, but he went on a streak where he had a ridiculous number of fights without taking a loss. That, as far as I'm aware, most of that is not documented, on film. But yeah, I rate him highly, definitely. Ray Robinson. During the 90s and maybe even up to the early 2000s, and perhaps even today, I don't read boxing publications anymore, physical publications, but the consensus among the old boxing journalists was that Ray Robinson was the greatest fighter of all time, pound for pound. It was almost seen as like, blasphemy not to have Ray Robertson as your number one of all time, pound for pound. I'll say, Iron says, Hatman, you were saying you're a free spirit. Do you think you could be an elite boxer without having the routine that most fighters have? That's a good question, and I would say the answer is no. I would say that my personality type is not conducive to success in a sport like boxing. So I'd say no. At least not long-term success, because in boxing you have to have routine and regiment. You have to have it. The past few live streams, I've always got questions about Chris Andre, what has happened to Chris Andre and what have you. The last time I got an update about Chris Andre might have been 6 months, a year ago. Somebody in the Element group in my element group spoke to him, I don't know where, maybe in DMs on Twitter or something, and he's fine. The last I heard, he's fine. That's all I can tell you. I don't hear nothing from him or what have you, but as I say, a member of my element group 6 months or a year ago said he was fine. He spoke to him and he was cool. A shout out to Chris Andre if he's out there. He's still a member of my element group, but he's not active in there anymore, so. But he is still in there. Iron says, hope he's doing okay. I'm sure he is. I'm sure he is. All right, peeps, I'm going to draw the curtain on this stream. As always, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me in the conversation. Except for the couple of idiots I had to block. Got one idiot who's like one of these pathological types who, has to turn up every stream on a sock account. I mean, some of these people are such losers, it's unbelievable. I've never understood it. Like people who stalk YouTube channels. If there's a channel that I don't like, do you know what I do? I just don't watch. Isn't that what like normal people do? But these like pathological weirdos who obviously have nothing going on in their lives, they get into this bizarre routine of like creating sock accounts so they can comment on a channel they've been blocked on. Weird behavior. But anyway, shout out to the rest of you, the vast majority. It's been a great conversation. And a special shout out, obviously, to everyone who donated via Super Chat. And if all of you could just do the courtesy before leaving, if you haven't done so already, of sticking a like on this stream. There's actually only 64 likes. This might be the lowest number of likes I've ever got on a stream. If you guys could just do the courtesy of sticking a like on this stream, it really helps with visibility. And the more successful these streams are, the more I do them. The less successful they are, the less likely I am to do them. So if you like the streams, just stick a like on it to let me know. And that will inform me that I need to keep doing streams because people are liking them. So if you can stick a like on it before you go, shout out to everybody. Shout out to Gorguga. He just turned up in the chat. Maybe he's been watching the whole time but not commenting. Shout out to him. And until next time, be good. Try and take it easy. And if you get it easy the first time, get it again. I'm out.